Incredible news. That is that we have a mikvah. A year to the day after we opened our center. Last year was the 15th day, 14th, 15th day of the month of Av. Exactly a year later, we opened our mikvah. And it's been a journey and a half. And obviously, I'm not going to talk necessarily about how a mikvah works, etc. That you could contact Kaya for that. But I just want to tell you my feelings about the fact that our shul has a mikvah. And to take it in a bit of a broader sense beyond mikvah. I had to sit down and write an article yesterday for the Rosh Hashanah magazine. We're still trying to give it a magazine this year. I was thinking to myself, what do you write? What hasn't been said yet about COVID? What hasn't been said yet about what we're going through? Every single cliche, every single meme, every single statement, oh yeah, it's been amazing, it's been terrible, people are struggling financially. I called this day, on one of the podcasts I sent out, I called it Groundhog Day, because literally that's what life is feeling like now. It's just one big Groundhog Day. Wake up, same story, go to sleep, same story, wake up, same story. The world doesn't change, your life doesn't change. Some days it's cold, some days it's nice Joburg weather, but other than that, it's literally Groundhog Day. So what do you say when you're trying to be new in a world that forgot what new is? Life is just repetitive. Life is just sameness over sameness over sameness, just over and over and over. And I ended up thinking about how, as a community, not only Linksfield, but all around the world, as how religion has reinvented itself in the most incredible way possible. Yes. Okay, what am I? Mommy's in the kitchen. How religion has reinvented itself in the most magnificent way. In a way, I wish government reinvented itself the way faith has. And we've gone to from a community that was one thing to a community which is something else entirely. I used to consider my community, on the most part, the people who showed up to Shul on Shabbos. And there was the Rosh Hashanah crowd, and it was important to cater for them. But on a day-to-day, unless they lost a loved one, there was not much of a communication. Often I would actually call, and we would be like, okay, Rabbi, what's your agenda? In other words, like, you calling for money. And suddenly there's been a major switch in the past year that what you call the Rosh Hashanah Jew, and no judgment in that. In other words, let people come when they want. But the Rosh Hashanah Jew has been coming and being involved in Shul in many ways more than the Shabbos Jew. I have my Shabbos day crowd, on the most part, I haven't really seen much of. Not everybody, some of you are from the Shabbos day crowd, but on the most part, it's a crowd that comes, they want the Shul, they want the bracha. They're not getting a Shul, they're not getting a bracha these days, so they're out. And a whole different community surfaced to the top of people that want to learn, but obviously in a way that works for them. They don't have to come out at night. Interesting topics, etc., etc., etc. And in this Groundhog Day, in this crazy COVID, a new reality has formed, not only for our community, but I've spoken to many rabbis and people around the world, and it literally changed the way Torah is taught, the way community is built. And my prayer is that once we go back to normal, we're also going to hold on to a lot of the stuff that we got now, because normal means that as a rabbi, I'm only touching 10 to 15% of my community on a regular basis, versus now that we're contacting and having contact with much, much more. So in other words, in this darkness, there has been an incredible renewal. And this renewal would never have happened if not for this darkness. Many of us, and I would imagine many of you even here on today, did not know how much you're interested in learning until suddenly you didn't have what you had till now, and suddenly people are grabbing onto any learning they could get. Sometimes people say, Rabbi, I'm stop sending so many videos. So I said, first of all, no one's obligating you to watch any of them. And second of all, there's people who ask me for more. So like I'm trying to balance. But in this time to discover a new self is amazing. Just like in Groundhog Day, if you remember the movie, I'm going to analyze a movie for you for a moment. It's a movie that happened in the early 90s. And basically it's a story about a certain fellow he's a TV broadcaster. And he goes to this place in Pennsylvania where they have a custom where they put a groundhog in a box, and based on if the groundhog jumps out or not or whatever, they decide if it's going to be a long winter or not a long winter. And he finds it extremely silly and petty and, cheesy, but he works for the TV station, so he has to go broadcast it. And what happens is the first day, he's very condescending towards everybody. He's very self-righteous. And then for the rest of the movie, he starts waking up and it's always the same day. And eventually he starts realizing, okay, maybe I have to live in this day until I get the day right. And as it's getting closer to the end of the movie, he's starting to get the day better and better, but still not working until finally he grabs the day. And during that day, he manages to find a girlfriend, and he manages to save somebody's life, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, once he lived that day, he gets to move on. And I know it's a movie, but I remember the first time I watched it, it felt like a very religious idea. That sometimes you're locked into a day and you're going through seemingly a lot of sameness, and you think that in the sameness you're not changing. But sometimes in the sameness is what you're changing. In other words, you are being transformed by the fact that you now have a much more monotonous, some might say even bland, unexciting life. A new you is being invented in that. It's interesting that when a seed goes into the ground, it has to decay first before it grows. So when a baby is born, it has to decay before it turns into a baby. There is this idea that sometimes out of nothingness sprouts a new element, a new energy. So I would advise that before we sit there, sending memes about how we want this year to end, I just got a meme a few minutes ago. I want to show it to you. It goes like this. It's like one of the million memes that you've seen around. Gonna ask my mom that if that offer to slap me into next year is still on the table. In other words, there's a lot of statements going around like, okay, let's just get over this year 2020, please. But do you realize that something new is getting created in this ground? Do you realize that when you look at the earth, all you saw was a seed go in and melt into nothingness, and then suddenly a tree comes out? Do you notice that sometimes the only way to create new is from nothing? Literally, you have to take away everything so that you can now go on a new road. As long as you have any strings attaching you to your previous life, you struggle. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we can acknowledge that in this, you want to call it dark times, bland times, groundhog times, whatever you want to call it, in these times, something magical is getting invented within each and every one of us in a different way. And I think that's very significant. And that has always been what the mikveh symbolizes. The mikveh symbolizes this idea of a woman, specifically over here it's a women's mikveh, but men also go to mikveh in their times, a person going into the mikveh, covering themselves with water fully, being engulfed almost in a womb. That's what we're told. It's actually symbolizes a womb. It's warm and you're engulfed, and then literally get reborn. And the point is, within a marriage, it brings a rebirth to the connection and a rebirth for love, and it's also a beautiful way to bring a child into the world following that, because a woman's always going to go to mikveh about the time that she ovulates, and there's usually a very high chance of pregnancy after that. And it allows a child to come into this world, again, from that being engulfed by nothingness. Literally, becoming a nothing is the greatest way to become a something. To lose yourself is the greatest way to become yourself. I remember watching a talk by Rabbi Sachs. I might actually, I'll see if I can find it, but it's an incredible talk by Chief Rabbi Sachs. He gave it to Chabad rabbis about 10 years ago. And it was about how to achieve dreams. And I'm actually going to show it to you. I'm finding it now. I'm going to try to find, it's like a long talk, but the point that he says is absolutely incredible. So he shares a story in 3 acts. Just stay with me. It's worth your watch. It is quite an incredible insight that I think he'll say much better than I do. So therefore, I'll let him say it.
So I started a sentence. In the situation.
Okay, so over here he's talking about as a young boy, as a young teenager, he meets the Rebbe just to meet somebody who's, fantastic and great. And the Rebbe says, what are you doing for Jewish children in Cambridge?
In which I find myself. And the Rebbe did something which I think was quite unusual for him. He actually stopped me in mid-sentence. He says, nobody finds themselves in a situation. You put yourself in a situation. And if you put yourself in that situation, you can put yourself in another situation. That moment changed my life. Here I was. Here I was, a nobody from nowhere, and here was one of the greatest leaders in the Jewish world challenging me not to accept the situation, but to change it. And then, that was when I realized what I've said many times since, that the world was wrong. When they thought the most important fact about the Rebbe was here was a man with thousands of followers. They missed the most important fact, that a good leader creates followers, but a great leader creates leaders. That's what the Rebbe did for me.
Okay, I'm going to now go to that was just a cute thing to watch, but I want to go to somewhere else. I have to just find the exact minute, somewhere around here.
January 1978, my friends.
Okay, this is where it goes. So basically, he's going to share a second episode that happens in his life.
Lubavitch told me exactly what to do. You put your question in writing, you give the Rebbe options, 1, 2, 3, and the Rebbe will tell you either 1 or 2 or 3. So I set out my options. I said to the Rebbe, I have a career in front of me, I have 3 choices. Number 1, maybe I would like to be an academic. Halavai, one day I would be a professor, or maybe a fellow of my college in Cambridge. Or number 2, I went to university initially to study economics. I'd like to be an economist. Or number 3, I'd like to be a barrister, an advocate. I was a member of one of the Inns of Court, the Inner Temple, where you studied to be a lawyer. I went into the Yechidus not knowing what the Rebbe would answer. Would it be 1? Would it be 2? Would it be 3? The Rebbe looked at me and he went through the list. Not 1, not 2, not 3. I thought, hang on, this is against the rules. The Rebbe did not give me time to reply. He told me Anglo Jewry was short of rabbis, and therefore, he said to me, you must train rabbis. He specified Jews College, which is where rabbis were trained in Britain. And then he said, you yourself must become a congregational rabbi so that your students will come and they will hear you give. I still remember the way he pronounced the word, sermons. They will hear you give sermons and they will know. And so you train rabbis, you become a rabbi. Well, I was a little verblanged, a word I've introduced into the English language, courtesy of the BBC. But if the Rebbe says do it, I did it. I gave up my 3 ambitions. I trained rabbis. I taught at Jews College. Eventually I became head of Jews College, and I became a congregational rabbi in Gothas Arena, Marmalade. You know, a funny thing happened. Having given up all my 3 ambitions, having decided to walk in the completely opposite direction, a funny thing happened. I did become a fellow of my college in Cambridge. I did become a professor. In fact, this year I have 3 professorships, 1 in Oxford University, 2 in London University. I did deliver Britain's top 2 economics lectures, the Mays Lecture and the Hayek Lecture, and in a temple made me an honorary barrister and invited me to give a law lecture in front of 600 barristers, the Lord Chancellor, the highest lawyer in Britain, and Princess Anne, who's the master. You know, you never lose anything by putting Yiddishkeit first, and I learned.
I want you to listen to the next statement, and then I'll go back on. This is the punchline, which is absolutely fantastic, and in many ways, it's made a big change in my life.
Something very deep. Sometimes the best way of achieving your ambitions is to stop pursuing them and let them pursue you.
Why did I share that? Because we're always told, chase your dreams. Because that's the way to get to there. Become a somebody, that's the way you'll achieve your dreams. And I remember I heard this talk, I think it was before I even moved here, maybe 2007, 8, I'm not sure. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, that's profound. In general, you know, I enjoy Rabbi Sachs's thoughts, but I find a lot of them, you know, similar or a bit repetitive. But here was like a really original thought that sometimes the best way to achieve your dreams is to stop chasing them and let them chase you, which is so counter the narrative that we tell our kids. It's so counter the narrative that we tell ourselves about ourselves. I became a somebody. But maybe the way to become a somebody is to be a nobody. In other words, give yourself over to something bigger than you, and then, as he says, let your dreams chase you. There's no question that that statement had a big impact on me, even in deciding to become a rabbi. Because when I heard that, what it told me is, Levi, if you have dreams for yourself, give it a chance. It will happen for you, even within the rabbinate, even within the world that you chose to live in, you can still find your other dreams. And I have to say that some of my dreams have already materialized within this career, within this role. We tell ourselves and we tell our children that the more you are a somebody, the more you exist, the more impact you are, the more talented you are, then you'll be the more, you know, the more you develop yourself into a successful sportsman and academic and socialite, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The more you build yourself up, that is going to chart the course of your life. But maybe it's just opposite. I'm not saying be a nobody as in a low life. I'm saying get out of your own head and give yourself over to something much bigger than yourself. And it shouldn't be about oneself. And then allow that to take you. Because as long as it's about you, then your dreams are only as big as you are. And we are very limited. We're human. But if I give myself over to something incredible, something godly, then my dreams are as big as God himself. Now that might sound like, you know, pop psychology, but I truly believe that. I truly believe that to give yourself over, to lose yourself, and then allow something else to be born, to stop trying to control your life and give yourself over to a higher power, that literally changes your course of life. It transforms you. in the most incredible ways. And that is one of the things that's happening during COVID is a lot of us, how we define us, is being taken away. Some of it will come back, some of it might never come back. And a lot of us are feeling empty. You know, I'm having quite a few people reaching out to me and telling me how they're just feeling empty. And obviously, you know, you try to, you know, tell them to believe and to find meaning, etc. But I wish I could tell them, and I usually don't find it's the right time to tell them when the person's crying on the phone. But what I wish I could tell a person is, you're feeling empty? Wow. Can we get something born out of that? When it's no longer you in control, when suddenly you realize that the world is in control of a much bigger power, and that ultimately life is not only about achieving dreams. You know, there's many people that had great dreams and they were told, follow your dreams and you'll be successful. But their dream happened to be open a restaurant, and that's not going anywhere, as many businesses. Some businesses are lucky to offer a commodity that people still need during this time or can still access, and other people don't. But it's nothing to do with dreams. God decided, God set a certain plague, and the pandemic affected us this way. Imagine it wasn't a pandemic, but rather all communication and internet, etc., collapses on itself for some reason through a terrible virus. Then all those businesses would go down. But somehow we chose this. But is it really all about dreams? Can it not be that in the absence, in the nothing, you lose yourself and you get born? And the truth is, you know this. If you're sitting in this class right now and you're thinking to yourself, anything other than what I'm talking about, then you're not here. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but you're not here. Because if you're going to try to take in a message, the only way to take it in is to let go of your thoughts and take in a thought. And then after that, reject it or accept it. But in the moment, you take it. You know, last night I spoke about dating. One of the things they always told us about dating is don't analyze her or him during the date. Get into it, get into the zone. After that, analyze how you feel. Because if you're analyzing her while you're talking to her, then you're just interrogating her. It's not natural, it's not organic, it's going to be a very awkward situation. Let go for a few hours. Get lost in the conversation. After that, come home and ask yourself, what am I feeling? Am I engaged? Am I connecting? So yes, sometimes it's time to analyze and ask questions, but to really connect, you have to let go. In every area of life, in marriage, with your child. If I'm mindful while I'm talking to my child about, the fact I'm talking to my child, then I'm not really talking to my child. I'm talking in my head. I know that Eckhart Tolle, at least the way I understood him in The Power of Now, he thinks a bit differently about that like you should be outside your own head, and that means being present. For me, I feel the opposite. I feel that true presence is that you're totally lost. You're not mindful about anything. You're absolutely lost in a moment. You're doing something you love, or you're doing something you're committed to, and you allow it to engulf you. You're allowing it to engage. And it's a very interesting thing. I could even give you an example of what I'm doing right now to shiurim. I always find that the first 5 minutes of my shiur are never my best 5 minutes. Whether I prepared or didn't prepare, it's irrelevant. I'm going from a place of self-consciousness, and I'm trying to lose myself in this, but you don't just do it in a moment. You have to ease yourself into it. And it's as a few minutes go by that I suddenly start locking out the world that I walked out of and locking into the world I'm in. And that's when I feel that my creativity shines. Because when you're in yourself, then you're limited by yourself. When you're out of yourself, then you're unlimited. And yes, we want our kids to be successful and we want them to achieve their dreams, etc. But maybe that piece of wisdom has relevance in their life as well. Be a good person. Reinvent yourself now. Discover things within yourself now. Go on the road that your heart is telling you, even if your mind doesn't necessarily agree. And believe me, one day your dreams will chase you. Lose yourself in the waters. And that's why mikvah is considered one of the most, if not the most important mitzvah in Judaism. Because of its concept, and that's why, if, for example, if you only have money to build a mikvah or a shul in a town, you have to build a mikvah first, because you could survive without a shul, as you see now, we're surviving without a shul. Might be hard, but we're surviving. But a woman can't survive without mikvah. Whatever, the marriages will just collapse. So the mikvah is a fundamental element of Jewish life, and that is that once a month a woman goes into the space and gets reborn out of nothing. You know, in Kabbalah, it talks about creating something out of something versus something out of nothing. Yesh mi yesh, or yesh mi ayin. Yesh means existence, mi yesh from existence, and yesh mi ayin means something, existence, mi ayin from nothingness. So, for example, this book is made out of a bunch of papers and ink, etc. So it was just, it went from one form to another form. This table, this laptop, it went from one form into another form, but it's not something out of nothing. The only places in life that we see something out of nothing is in birth, of children, of vegetation, that literally a seed comes, decays, literally becomes nothing, and then something incredible happens. And we're told that when we have a child, it's the only time that we're truly godlike, because we literally have the potential to create something out of nothing. And that's why it's such a powerful, energy and such a powerful potency. But the point is that if you want to create, it has to be out of nothing. Because if it's something out of something, it's not creation. It's just forming, craftsmanship. You're just taking one thing and putting it into something. You're taking a piece of wood and turning it into a bench. It's amazing, it's talent, but you haven't created something new. To create something new, it only happens out of nothing. This is a very deep Kabbalistic idea, but it doesn't only have to sit in the world of Kabbalah, it could sit in your own mind, this idea that let go and then you'll fly. Let go of your thoughts and then you fly. Stop thinking about oneself and then go. And we spoke about it a few weeks ago, this idea that sometimes someone will say they're shy, but shy is just self-consciousness, and self-consciousness is just ego. I'm walking into a room and all I can think about is how I'm feeling. That's not humility. It might be insecurity, but it's not humility, because all I'm doing is spending that time thinking about how I'm feeling instead of getting lost in the vibe. And again, for some of us, it's really hard. I'm not saying there's anything wrong. Like I might be comfortable, let's say, giving a speech, but I'm quite uncomfortable in crowd socializing. Each one of us has our comfort zones and our discomfort. But when I'm uncomfortable, I shouldn't convince myself that this is an act of humility. It isn't. It's not like, oh, I'm a really humble guy. I don't like standing up. And that's why I'll spend the next 2 hours thinking about how I'm feeling. No. The goal is to be able to stop thinking and just go. So ask yourself, you've already been in lockdown for 4 months plus. Today is 4 months since Pesach started, and we were in lockdown weeks before Pesach. It's basically 5 months. We've been in almost just under 5 months that we've been in lockdown. It's a long time. I was talking to a friend of mine in Canada. He's like, what, you're still in lockdown? He says, we're done 2 months ago. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. We still have a while to go. 5 months of a lot of nothingness. What's going to get born out of that? Because something has to get born. when I take away one thing, something else naturally will grow. Sometimes, just give you an analogy, you have a field which is covered with rocks. A lot of the chalutzim, a lot of the people who went to Israel before the establishment of the state, what they were doing was literally turning Israel to fertile ground. It was like it had potential, but for years, for thousands of years, it lay desolate. And what they were doing a lot of the times, like you read, whether it's called the mayor's memories or other people's memories, and they're just like literally picking up rocks and moving them from one place to another to allow the earth to uncover. Think about the past few months as many rocks being taken away from you. Some of them are hurtful. In other words, some of those rocks are really sore because it's your financial stability, etc. But many of those rocks were just busyness of life. And now you have earth that can finally grow. You could finally take your shovels and take your hoe and knock it into the earth and create something beautiful. So everyone asks, what will the world look like once we're done? But the truth is that question is only relevant if we're going from something into something else. So then you could predict based on the fact that I have a piece of wood, I could guess the things that you'll build with that piece of wood. Might be a bench, might be a chair, might be a door, whatever, even if there's 50 options, 500 options, at some stage I'll run out. But when you're creating something out of nothing, nothingness has infinite potential. So what the world will be like, we have no clue, because we have gone as a society to a very, very open, hollow space. And what we create of that is very much in our hands, but unpredictable unless we decide to create. There's no script to this. And I would say this to people who are struggling now with, emotional loneliness, depression, sadness, that it's often in that darkness that creativity is born. And it's often in that nothing, that feeling of absolute nothingness, that magic is born. It's true. The deeper you are, often the darker your battles, but as you're going deeper into the darkness, something new is surfacing. I know it. I know it in my own life. When I go through a stage of just blah, flat, I sit there thinking, what happened to my inspiration? I have nothing insightful to say. I have nothing insightful to think. And you almost quiet your mind for a few days, or a week or two, depending on the time of the year and depending what you could afford. That 2 weeks of just being, forgive me, doff, just not thinking, allows your brain to start regenerating a whole new thought process. Sometimes the best way to create is to stop creating. Sometimes the best way to create dreams is to stop dreaming. In other words, sometimes the pause is more important than what you're doing now. I remember, I think it was Nachi Levine was one time talking about music. And he says a big part of understanding music is to understand the pauses in music. Because music is not just full-time singing or playing. There's pauses. And the pause, if you do it at the right space in the right way, it creates majesty in the music. Think about the most beautiful classical pieces. At some stage it goes silent. And then, whether it's 2 seconds, 5 seconds later, something else gets reborn. In other words, silence is birth. Too much time focused on chasing and running doesn't necessarily get you anywhere, other than just running around in circles like a chicken without a head. But if I am letting go, suddenly I wake up and I'm in a totally different direction. So yes, are there moments in the past 5 months that are impossible? True. But has this been, not only for myself, I've seen it in the community, I've seen it in so many people. a forced holiday in which people had to start consciously or unconsciously reassessing their lives, unbelievable. And maybe that's what God wants out of this. Stop chasing. The 20th century and the 21st century, we're chasing. We're always running, physically or metaphorically, to the newest technology, to the newest thing. The world is constantly changing. You're always running to adapt to this world. The world changes much quicker. Like a generation is 1 year. Generation 1 Apple iPhone, generation 2 Apple iPhone, etc. Life changes very quickly. And in that rush to change, we aren't actually changing. It's not real change. It's incremental change. It's something from something. And I really believe that the people who lived 100 years ago in a much quieter world, I'm not talking about during world wars, but like in a quieter world, were able to create within themselves much more magic. Not because they were more magical, but they had the time too. Whether it's beautiful letters. I always say, when you want to get to know your grandparents of the past, one way to do it is to read their letters. If our grandkids want to get to know us, they'll be reading emojis. And each face is going to say, oh, my grandma and my grandpa, at that day, they were being cynical. Oh. And the other face says that they're being serious and they're being sad. And and then there's the muscle one. And then there's this one. And each one has deep meaning. But ultimately, they're not going to know anything about us. Because we're chasing, but we're not being creative. When was the last time you actually did creative writing? And I'm not talking about creative writing to go into a newspaper, just a creative letter to describe your life to your friend. And chances are, if you were alive 20, 30 years ago, you did do it. I did it, and I'm a young person. I did it 15, 20 years ago. I was a student in yeshiva. I actually wrote a letter and sent it to New York. And I remember that letter because I rewrote it a few times. It was in a new language. It was in Hebrew. And I worked hard on it, but something magical got created. I gave myself time. Now, I'm on the computer, I'm writing up an article. Meanwhile, my WhatsApp's ringing. Meanwhile, Facebook, somebody's sending a request. Meanwhile, my kids are screaming, thank God, and a lot of other stuff. And I'm so busy. After an hour of that, you feel drained and busy. But what did you actually create in that hour? So here's my take-home message. I think, went a bit over time, but that's not a crime. For me, the take-home message is embrace quiet. Embrace silence. Even if right now you don't see anything getting born, something is decaying in your ground and is about to sprout. Something is about to grow if it hasn't grown yet. And each day of this allows something else to grow. Don't negate it. Don't fight it. Don't feel sorry. Just allow it. Allow yourself to be taken over by the quiet. Because truly, I really believe each and every one of us is artistic and wise and deep and empathetic. Some of us may be more exposed to it within ourselves than others, but we all are that. And in this quietness, we could discover them. Listen to the quiet. Shkoyach, everybody. Thank you so much. That was a great crowd.